Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1034 just came out, and it was Sanji'S Big Fight. I thought it was pretty good. I actually read this fight, then went back and reread some of Sanji's older fights throughout the series, so Mr. 2, Jaibura, etc., to just kind of get a feel for where I feel this stacks up, because this is obviously Sanji's most important fight, his highest level opponent that he's ever had, his first really big one-on-one in the New World, which is kind of crazy to think about. Sanji has really only had skirmishes so far throughout the New World, unless you want to go all the way back to, Fishman Island against Wadatsumi. But this was his first really complete extended fight. I don't even count page 1 because that was like 6 pages. So, in my opinion, I think that, first of all, Queen is by far Sanji's most versatile opponent. I think he had the most interesting set of abilities that a Sanji opponent has ever had. One thing that I've talked about in the past with Sanji fights is that a lot of Sanji's opponents, they're on the craftier side. They're trickier opponents, and Oda likes to kind of play that up so that Sanji has something extra to deal with throughout the fight. So, for example, Kirubi fighting Sanji underwater, maybe Kirubi wasn't so much tricky, but he was taking advantage of Sanji's inability to breathe underwater, his advantage as a fisherman, etc. Mr. 2 kept, transforming into Nami because he was taking advantage of Sanji's inability to hit women. Jaibura tried to tell, in classic wolf fashion, he tried to spin some tales, tell Sanji some lies to manipulate Sanji to get an opening. These are, common trends that you see throughout Sanji fights. Even the very first fight that we had in the series for Sanji with Sanji versus Pearl or Jin, there was manipulation used there with Zeph being used as hostage, etc. So, in my opinion, I think that Queen fits the mold pretty much perfectly in that sense. He started busting out the Germa abilities, and really it was the invisibility suit and what Queen was trying to do with the invisibility suit that has me thinking that, again, Queen has been trying to use heavy manipulation throughout the fight. First of all, trying to get Sanji to bust out the raid suit just so that Queen could crush him at full power. Then Queen trying to take advantage of Sanji's inability to see him by using his own abilities against him, and then going after Asome, who, as we learned just with this chapter, Sanji did not in fact hit. I do have some thoughts on that I'll save for, towards the end of this review. Right now, we're still just reviewing Queen's abilities. But in general, Queen has proved to be a fairly crafty, tricky opponent. He's got a lot of different abilities, hidden abilities up his sleeve that he's been hiding from Sanji. Queen, in my opinion, best Sanji opponent so far. I would have liked to see, I guess Queen kind of going all out with all of the Germa abilities at once, if that makes, we didn't get to see Niji. I guess Reiju we don't really need to see, because at the end of the day, Reiju, her poison, I don't know how much it can be used offensively, but I thought we were leading up to a big panel of Queen just blasting on all cylinders, shooting, lasers, Ichiji's beams, using Niji's lightning to zip around, shooting electricity, shooting out his arms, etc., like Yonji. But, at the end of the day, I still think that Queen kind of showed us quite a bit. I was not expecting him to have all of Germa's abilities, so that was kind of a shocker. And at the same time, I think it's just kind of funny that this whole fight, Queen's been obsessed with Judge. That's all he's been talking about this entire fight. Sanji literally could not care less, and he makes that very clear this chapter. So Queen just keeps talking about, I wanted to do this or that, or prove to Judge, or show this. And Sanji's like, dude, what? I literally don't care. That's not my concern whatsoever. I destroyed that raid suit. I don't care about all of this stuff. Now, flip side is, I think Sanji does care about the enhancements that he's gotten, right? Because I like that this chapter finally kind of really broke down everything that Sanji's gained off of this new buff, turning into a Germa soldier. So, it's hard to kind of rate him at the moment, where he falls in terms of, combatants. But he's pretty clearly capable of going up against, I think, any Yonko commander. Not saying he's going to beat, Marco or something like that necessarily, but just that I think that the combination that Sanji listed out of the abilities that he has, so the exoskeleton in particular, so the enhanced durability, enhanced strength, and enhanced speed, and most importantly, this is kind of unique to him, having those three things, I like the fact that now allows him to go hotter with his flames. So I like the fact that it's implied that Sanji could have always gotten hotter with his flames, but it's just his own body's limitations that kept holding him back from that. So now that he's gotten these upgrades, he can actually do what he was always capable of doing, which is, heating up even further. I think that's interesting that maybe examples of times that Sanji's gotten extra passionate, like Hell's Memories, and he's really gone off and used an extremely high level fire attack, you could kind of headcanon a bit of explanation to that, maybe in the heat of the moment, Sanji is fine going hotter than he really should, right? But now he's actually got the body to back that up, and now he can actually do that, I guess, somewhat more safely. That's like a little interesting idea that I guess we could, we'll see if that holds true in the future. I don't know if we'll ever get a long explanation again of how Sanji's abilities really work, because Oda very often doesn't care to explain these things. We all remember Diablo Jambe and Ashura when they first came out. So I'm actually very pleasantly surprised that Oda took the time to kind of break down, like, here's Sanji's new upgrades, here's how it affects his attacks, his kicks are a lot heavier and a lot hotter than ever before. So that was really appreciated by Oda. Also, looking back at Sanji's previous fights, I feel like, it's hard to do a one-to-one perfect comparison, but I do feel like Queen might have been the opponent that pushed Sanji the hardest in terms of difficulty straight up. This was obviously, I think, the fight section of this chapter was, I guess, relatively shorter compared to previous battles. It was definitely shorter, but we did see Sanji at least struggling with a lot of Queen's attacks. It did seem like, rereading the Jaibura fight, it actually did turn out, I wasn't remembering quite properly, but Jaibura did actually get in a lot of damage towards Sanji towards the end. So it's hard to really balance out, like, who pushed Sanji the hardest. But as is the case with most Sanji fights, I think he's never pushed to the highest difficulty the way that, like, Luffy and Zoro tend to come away from their fights basically on the brink of death very often, like Zoro versus Mr. One, Zoro versus Hachi. With Zoro, it's very often not because of the opponent itself, but rather because of circumstances surrounding it, like Zoro versus Hachi or Zoro versus Kabaji, etc. But that is just very often the case. So, Sanji, I'm kind of used to Sanji not having the absolute hardest, like, oh, I nearly died sort of scenario with his battles, but I did like the fact that it did seem like Queen pushed him, I think, a little bit harder than previous opponents. It's kind of hard to tell with Sanji. One thing I will say that I felt a little weird to me in terms of compared to previous fights, which is that Oda kind of broke things up. And I feel like he didn't, I don't know how it would have read back to back, but I feel like he didn't need to, which was basically, how do I say this? So the section of the fight where Sanji had his destruction of the raid suit moment, his kind of internal conflict, his realizations, etc., and then coming to the conclusion that this is the type of person that he wants to be, and then turning the tables and, using Hell's Memories, which then naturally immediately segues into this fight. I don't think it was the best that Oda split that up from this chapter, because I think it just makes for a much cleaner battle if you get, the character stuff and then this point, the actual finishing moves of the battle, the choreography. It does feel a little odd to me. I think it's possible that Oda might have just done that so that Oda could have Queen slip in the Lunarian explanation, but Queen could have probably have done that even if we, at an earlier point in the Sanji fight, if Oda wanted to set that up for Zoro. It's hard to tell. Like, maybe Oda wanted to do certain things or, like, establish certain points in a specific order. But I definitely feel like, even just looking at any past One Piece fight, I think usually it flows the best, in my opinion, when you kind of get to just focus in on that character for a few chapters. Like, you can use Zoro versus Mr. One. I think that fight worked really well because we just got to focus on Zoro throughout that battle. We got his internal conflict. We got the resolution he came to. We got the victory, etc., all in one flow, because you get kind of a smoother storyline for the battle. It feels a little stronger to me. Same thing with, like, even a shorter battle like Nico Robin, right? We like seeing the character stuff meshed in with the finishing moves, the action, etc. So that's the only thing I really have to say about this fight. That's maybe why I feel like it was a little short at the end of the day, like a bit shorter. I just liked the final exchange of moves with Queen revealing all of his Jeremiah abilities and everything like that, and then Sanji basically zoning in on him, defeating him with his upgraded abilities, etc., right? So I liked the action of this chapter, just made the fight feel a little short because it's so disconnected from previous events, because, we had first Sanji and Queen back in the main live floor, some skirmishes going on there, then we take a break, then we get this character moment, then we take a break, and then we get this chapter, which, has some good action, but a little bit condensed, basically. So that's my only thoughts on it. Beyond that, I think that, at the very least, the one thing that threw me a little bit from this chapter is basically that we will not be following up, unless things go south in a certain way, or there's some more twists to be seen. We did not get to follow up much on Sanji's internal conflict from that whole scenario where he thought that he was turning into a Germa soldier through and through, right? So back when we thought that Sanji's actually transforming into a straight-up Germa soldier, we were posed with the interesting question of, okay, Sanji potentially losing his emotions, turning into something he's not. I would have really liked... See, the thing is, if you ask me, like, what would you have liked to have seen? I don't know what I would have liked to have seen, but I thought that Oda was heading towards something a little, I don't know, like a little bit more following through on that little thread through the Queen battle. Like, not saying I would like, Sanji to actually just turn into an emotionless soldier, but it did seem like it was essentially resolved as, okay, he didn't hit the woman. I think many of us believe that he did not hit the woman, so that makes sense. But at least the possibility of Sanji having to undergo some sort of a change. I guess you could say that was essentially resolved with just us as the reader knowing and being made to understand that, like, if Sanji were to lose his emotions, then he would just kill himself. Right? He asked Zoro to kill him if that's what happened, right? Like, if Sanji turned into someone he's not, then he was basically like, you just kill me. So I guess that was mainly the moment that we needed to essentially see, all right, this is what Sanji would do. And then, this battle, it seems like, okay, but that's not happening anyway, so it's not a problem. So I guess what I'm saying is that it seems like Oda wanted to show us what Sanji is willing to do if things got to a certain point. But then the notion that Sanji actually is transforming or that there is anything to worry about was kind of just, like, not something that actually happened. There's a word for it that I can't think of at the moment, but not something that actually happened. Like, that was just a false alarm, essentially, right? I would have loved it if maybe it wasn't that much of a false alarm, if it actually did turn into something a little bit, more that Sanji had to grapple with over the course of the Queen fight, something that he maybe had to overcome, maybe if a transformation is starting to occur. I don't know, I would have personally liked it if there was something a little more to that perceived threat of, like, Sanji losing his emotions, if that actually did begin to happen in some ways. I think a lot of people were really interested in the eyebrow shift, all of that stuff. So I'm not going to say that, like, that is something that I would demand of this fight, like, for me personally, or something like that. Like, oh, if it doesn't have that, then I'm disappointed. It's just that I would have liked to have seen it, and I was, like, really excited. As you guys know, I was like, this is Sanji's best moment. So I was really excited to see where that went, and it didn't go anywhere, but that's fine because I guess the moment was really what we needed, right? So that's my full thoughts. As for Sanji's finishing moves on Queen, it reminded me a lot of the Kirubi battle. I like it a lot when Sanji gets to bust out a lot of his different attacks, just because, when Luffy finishes off an opponent, I think Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, they all have, like, different ways of finishing off opponents very often when they're kind of going off. Zoro's, like, a very, like, one and done type character, so it's just one slash, opponent's out. Luffy's most satisfying victories, in my opinion, are very often when he's just, like, throwing out, like, a giant barrage of punches. But Sanji's Sanji's finishing moves can often be really cool in a different way, where it's also throwing out a barrage of attacks, but he's having to throw out a large variety of moves, right? He does a large variety of kicks. So he'll kick people in the neck, in the shin. He'll, do a handstand, start twirling around, then throw out a big finisher. You know what I mean? Like, it's a kind of a breakdance style, like A, B, C, D, E, F. Like, he does a lot of different things and then finishes them off with one big one. So I've always liked that about Sanji's fighting style. I think that the Kirubi battle is the closest thing from the fights that I was reading to basically this sort of finishing move. The little thing that I'll say, I thought the finishing move was really cool. The Boef, I literally can't pronounce it. The Boef burst, can't pronounce it. Probably some sort of complicated dish. But I did think that it's just a little unfortunate. Like Oda put out recently, I think in an SBS or an interview or something like that, that he is sometimes limited in number of panels that he can do in a chapter. So he has to figure out how to condense. And I think that was very much at display here. I would have liked very much if the last page, like a lot of Sanji's other kicks besides the finishing kick were basically very small panels. So it wasn't really impressive choreography, I suppose. Especially if you go back and compare, I guess, to the finisher in Arlong Park against Kirubi. It was a very similar series of events, but it was a little bit cooler in my opinion because you got a nice panel dedicated to each move. You kind of got to see visually a little more of what's happening before Sanji hits him with the finishing mutton chop. So overall, I think that the Queen fight, I enjoyed it for the variety that Queen showed. I think it was just cool seeing Queen bust out all of these abilities and then Sanji overcome him. And I think I was excited at Sanji'S upgrades. So, you know, different abilities being showcased on both ends. Obviously, Sanji beating his highest level opponent. Definitely enjoyed it. I feel like the flow of the overall fight, a little bit weird. Would have liked to see a bit more follow through from the character conflict from before. And I think the actual, if you really narrowed down, the actual action choreography section of the fight was relatively short, as have been all of the Onigashima battles so far relative to previous Straw Hat fights. Yeah, I think this is Sanji's most enjoyable fight. At least this action section that we did get was pretty cool in my opinion. So that's all for this review, and I will talk to you all later.